most of your nitrogen is just found in the air as a gas, right? As N2 gas. And it's really, really, really unreactive. So you can't do anything with the nitrogen that's in the air. Okay, so what happens is that nitrogen, if you look over here, needs to turn into these things called nitrates. Once the nitrogen is converted into these things called nitrates, then the plants can use them, right? And then it's the same thing. The plants use the nitrates, then we eat the plants, or animals eat the plants, and then we get the nitrates, right? So it's that same idea of it's a cycle, and it's coming from the atmosphere. It's starting in plants, and then it's ending in animals and us, right? And again, you've got this idea of a cycle. Okay, so that's the first step you need to remember. Nitrogen in the atmosphere has to get converted into these things called nitrates, right? So the stages of nitrogen is this first one called nitrogen fixation, right? And again, all this is taking the nitrogen from the air that can't be used and then converting it into a form that can be used, right? And things like weird things like peas and beans contain this bacteria that do this process. So they take the nitrogen from the air and they convert it into a nitrate or something that the plant can then use. Okay, and they literally just live in the soil, and the bacteria do this just naturally. They do that. Okay. The second step is the same. It's called feeding. So again, like with carbon cycle, we eat the plant or the cow and we get the carbon. Same thing here. Animals eat the plants, we eat the animals, and we get this nitrogen, right? Coming into us from the atmosphere. Okay. Any form of waste product coming out of an animal also has nitrogen in it. So we have to get rid of that in the form of urea. So the urea that you pass then has the nitrogen in it, and now that's going back into the atmosphere, right? So again, we have a cycle. We started in the atmosphere, we went into plants, we went into animals, we went into us, into urea, which is then back into the atmosphere, yeah? And we've got this whole process. Okay, so nitrification is also converting ammonia into nitrates, right? Plants can then take up the nitrates, and then the opposite of that, right? So you've got the nitrogen, it gets converted into nitrates, the plants use that. Okay, the opposite process of that, which is bad, we don't want that. Although sometimes it's okay because it's releasing nitrogen back into the atmosphere, right? Is this process called denitrification. Okay, so this is when you've got bacteria in the soil which take the nitrate and they convert it back into nitrogen gas. Okay, so it would look like this. You'll have, let's go up here. So you can maybe write this in your notes somewhere, right? So nitrogen fixation. So you could have the nitrogen gas, right? And it's converted into nitrates. Okay. Plants then use the nitrates. Right, so now we've got the nitrogen from the atmosphere, the plants can use it, right? The denitrification is the opposite. So we've got the nitrates and they get converted back into nitrogen gas, which goes into the atmosphere, right? And so now we have a full cycle. We started with the nitrogen in the atmosphere, we used the nitrates, then we get the nitrogen back into the atmosphere. Right? And we've got, again, this whole cycle. Okay, so if you look here, that's what's happening. So always start at the top. So you've got atmospheric nitrogen over here, right? It gets fixed. That's the first stage. We're going this way. So it gets fixed. That can happen by bacteria. It can happen by legumes, which is a type of plant. And actually, it can happen by lightning, which is really interesting. So lightning in the air also turns the nitrogen into nitrates. Okay. That will then have the ammonia. The ammonia gets converted into nitrates, and then that can get taken up by plants, right? The nitrates can also, if you look on this arrow over here, can also be denitrified, and then we get the N2 back in the atmosphere, right? And again, you've got this idea of a cycle. So you're starting with something in the atmosphere, you've got to make it so that animals and plants can use it, and then it gets released back into the atmosphere, right? And again, that is the whole process of the nitrogen cycle. Okay,